Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for attending today. It certainly has been a challenging year for the healthcare sector. Energy efficiency, sustainability, and managing facility costs have not been top of mind this year. But from our perspective, as the year kind of moved through, we did see a growing interest from facility managers that were starting to explore opportunities to offset their costs given the tight budgets that they were up against. And look, even recent events in Texas will certainly provide probably a different take on resiliency. So we did want to take the opportunity today to sort of share with you, what we are about, both CPOWER and hospital energy. We're going to take the next half hour to talk through how facilities can lower their energy costs, risk manage their building activity, while creating those revenue streams to support, facility upgrades, and even again, from a revenue generating perspective, take those dollars and put them into other facility initiatives. I will start with one key takeaway, that before any facility undertakes any sustainability projects, be it fuel cell, solar, battery storage, generator retrofits, or even replacements, always take a look to see if there are opportunities to monetize those assets in the type of participation programs that we're going to talk about today. Our panelists will dive into the benefits of creating that sustainable and resilient healthcare project, again with the types of products that may or may not be available. Let me start off by giving you a little high level on CPOWER. We are the largest provider of demand side energy management dating all the way back to the 1990s. Our expertise in monetizing resource capabilities reaches nearly 1,700 customers across 11,000 sites, which represents about over 4 gigawatts of electric load under management. Keep in mind, too, that this encompasses 60 demand side programs, again, throughout regulated and deregulated markets. So there is a lot to be had, whether you're in that deregulated market or even in a regulated market. We'll share a little bit of that with you as well today. With that, Steve, you want to give us a highlight on hospital energy, please?
Yes, thanks, Keith. So my name is Steve Jalowick. I'm Vice President for Engineering Services with Hospital Energy. I've been with the company for about 6 years. And before that, I spent 20 years on the front line of healthcare facilities management in various roles before I came over to the so-called dark side of consulting. Hospital Energy is an advisor for energy primarily for healthcare. We specialize just in healthcare. We manage over $1 billion worth of energy spend across the United States for hospitals. We've written some of the best practice standards for energy procurement and energy resiliency for the American Society of Healthcare Engineers. And so our work is not just on the procurement side, but it also goes on to the demand side, and it ties in well with the work and what CPOWER brings to the table.
Great. Appreciate it. So we're going to kick off. I'll let Jeremy take over from our side to sort of give you the market from our side. So Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself and kick it off?
Yep. Thanks, Keith and Steve. My name is Jeremy Ellis. I'm a national account executive here at CPOWER. So that means I work across the country in both regulated and deregulated zones where we have these type of projects that we can help monetize for you. So a little bit of my background, I've been in the energy space for 15 plus years now. Prior to coming to CPOWER, I was on the commodity side. So now getting into the demand side and more energy management, it's a good conduit to help understand your supply contracts, things along those lines, and what you can maybe do with your assets and how to monetize those for your facility. So what can you do? Good question. Basically, what we're trying to do is optimize your distributed energy resources to get you the most earning potential that you can. And there's kind of 5 pillars within that, whether it be distributed generation. So, that could be solar, wind, things along those lines for your generation assets, using money that you find to help that resiliency there. Demand response, so active demand response that some of you may be familiar with in zones that we're able to monetize that and do active demand response with active curtailment. Energy storage, so if you have batteries or things like that online, we can help, get those assets into the market for you to start to monetize those assets as well. Peak demand management, a really big portion of your supply bill. So we can work with you on helping you, curtail during those peak periods, whether it be a 5 CP and PJM or a 4 CP and other markets, and get you so that you're going to lower those costs on your supply bill. And the last one there is energy efficiency. And that's a way that we can monetize permanently reduced demand. Now, that's not everywhere, so we can kind of get into the weeds about that a little bit, but it's a PJM and New England program where any type of permanent year-round KW reduction, we can take and monetize that in the market, and we have a unique position to do so in the marketplace. So, next slide. So programs, there's quite a few programs that CPOWER works with, and they kind of run the range from, active to more passive, demand response. Good thing to take a look at there is the 3 demand response questions. So when you're considering these type of programs, you're going to want to first identify what can be curtailed. CPOWER is uniquely positioned in that we have a in-house engineering team with years of experience that have worked with facilities like healthcare facilities, manufacturing, other verticals, but specifically with healthcare facilities to help them identify ways that they can curtail their load and use generators and make sure that those are qualified gens in order to participate in demand response. Second question is how quickly it can be curtailed. Some of our programs have different lead times, whether it be 30 minutes or 10 minutes or shorter lead times to longer lead times. How fast can you get that curtailment in place or switch over to backup generation? And then the last question you need to ask yourself is how long can that curtailment be sustained? Obviously, we saw down in Texas last week that they went from one event to the next. So there was a long period of downtime there, but the return there is there's some customers of ours that, earn substantial income as a result of them being down and rolling into those programs and staying curtailed to help alleviate the stress on the grid. So, there's 5 different areas of programs there, whether it be capacity, ancillary, economic programs where you may be submitting energy back into the grid. There's utility programs and energy efficiency programs, like I mentioned. The beauty of what we do here at CPOWER is identify what programs you're eligible for, as well as the programs that you can actively participate in, and we can stack those programs with one another. So there can be a situation where you're actively participating in 3 different programs, and the lift is the same as each, and you're just stacking the monetary benefits. And we can help identify those for you and make sure that you're in the right programs with ones that you can actively participate in and be successful at the same time. That's the most important. We don't want to get you into a program or find yourself in a program where you're not going to be able to earn, the income that we propose to you because you're just not able to curtail. So those 3 questions help lead us in the right direction. Demand response programs across the country. So this is, high level, 36,000 foot view of what's available out there, across from PJM. I'm located in Chicago, so a lot of my work is done in PJM, but being on the national team, I have customers that, run the range across the country. If you have, facilities in different zones, we can help identify those zones where you may be eligible. California, ERCOT down in Texas, the New York ISO, ISO New England, where there's the potential to stack not only grid programs, but also utility-specific programs. And then in addition to that is the regulated utilities. So we have a partnership with regulated utilities across the country, and we're constantly looking to add more regulated utilities to offer these demand response programs in areas where there's not competitive supply, but we can go ahead and take a look at demand response programs. So you can see on there just high level in some of the zones, it can be a pretty juicy amount of dollars per megawatt that you can see there. For example, in New York, in Zone J, for example, it can get up into the 6 figures. New England, there's a possibility to get into the the high dollar value by stacking those programs. PJM, within PJM, there's multiple zones. So, where I'm at here in ComEd, it's about 70,000 per megawatt year. ERCOT has a couple different programs, whether it be the ERS program or the LR, which is the load response program. The LR program is where you bid into a day ahead program. And when those energy prices spike down there, our customers that were bidding into that program saw the benefits of being curtailed and providing electricity back to the grid at a very high dollar value. So the last slide that I'm going to touch base on here is, like we mentioned, both the deregulated energy markets and the regulated utility areas. So if you go ahead and take a look there, I'm sure there may be some place where you can find a facility within your company's portfolio, or maybe you're a partner looking to work with CPOWER where you have customers in those zones. So some of the regulated utilities, Duke in Indiana, Kentucky, and Florida. We've got Evergy up in the Kansas City area. There's a couple regulated territories, Encore and San Antonio down in Texas. A new one that we just added, which has been great, is out in Arizona. So some of you that are looking to, kind of move the needle there and get competitive supply into Arizona, here's a great way to get a, kind of a head start with customers out there and work with CPOWER. We're an exclusive with APS out there providing demand response. So across the board there. So a pretty good portion of the grid we can help you on, whether it be deregulated or regulated utility areas. And we can help you find ways to monetize your assets and find programs that you can be successful at. Keith?
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Steve, you want to carry on with generators and resiliency?
Yeah, so I think there's a logical tie here, and it certainly is part of the reason why our two companies work together. And that's for the important question about resiliency in hospitals. And clearly, as Jeremy alluded to, Texas is an unfortunate but great example of that. And we've had many of those in the last few years with the hurricanes that hit Florida, the hurricanes that hit Manhattan. And this is a subject that's one of the two, I think, out of my facility management career that were near and dear to my heart. And one is the resiliency, and the other was energy efficiency. And again, there's kind of a correlation there. There's a connection. Because as, again, I think either Keith or Jeremy referred to, one of the first things you really ought to be looking at is reducing your load. Do everything you can to control that usage and be doing some kind of constant commissioning where you're always controlling that load. And the second piece is then how are you really set up for a grid failure? If the grid went out in total, how expensive would that be for your facility? I think a number of facilities got a good test of that with the COVID virus across the country. When you had to shut down your day surgeries and your other outpatient procedures, the amount of money that you were losing was huge. How often do you test your backup capabilities? And I know the standard answer on that is, well, we do the month-to-month load test for on the generators that are required. But do you really test every component? And there's a couple slides in a few minutes that'll refer to regulations that are out there. And I think it's something that the regulatory agencies will start paying a lot more attention to is, are you doing a full load test where you're really doing a black start? Are you? And I know that there's a lot of debate about that in the facility management world. I've been in a few of those debates. I honestly was one of those facility managers that was of the ilk to do black start generator tests. That means that I would go to the mains in the basement and kill the incoming power. And yes, was it difficult for the staff at first? Yeah, it was. But once they got used to it, they had a better chance of being able to explain to me the weaknesses and vulnerabilities they saw in patient care that we could address before there was a grid emergency. And two, they became part of that team to try to make the facility better and safer in case we had to be that place of last resort. So it's not a question of how often you test and how it may be more of a question of how you test. And how long can you last on that backup power? And again, we know the standard regulatory questions, but I think in this day and age, and again, Texas just brings this to the forefront, people want to look at that question a little bit more realistically than just the plain regulations that are out there. In the cross here to CPOWER is that what we frequently recommend, and actually the best practice standard that we wrote on energy business planning for resiliency, goes to the heart of using these demand response program incentives to help pay for that additional generation. Most hospitals that I survey, and by the way, not on a regulatory basis, obviously, always on a consultative and helpful basis, do not have enough generation to power all their chillers and equipment. And that gap should be filled to prepare for a true grid emergency like we saw. Again, I don't want to keep harping on it, in Texas just over the last couple of weeks. Will demand response incentives pay for all that generation? No. But they will pay for a down payment. And the way we've always looked at it is you need to go to the CFO and say there's a gap and it's going to cost X. And by the way, I can pay for part of that. And that's going to be a lot better than just saying we need X amount of dollars and it's going to be a sunk asset. Why don't we go through the next slide, Keith? So I won't spend a lot of time on this. Mostly, I think if there's facility managers or consultants that are watching this in this virtual meeting are very familiar with the CMS emergency generation rules. Certainly, you can have generation that doesn't meet doesn't feed the whole hospital, but then you have to have a plan for what are you going to do with the patients in those areas that don't have emergency power. What are you going to do if you can't cool those areas? What are you going to do if you can't heat those areas? Do you really want to be the community hospital that has to evacuate patients is really what this comes down to. Next slide, Keith. And I think we already just talked about this. Our backup power is sufficient only to keep lighting and fire suppression going during evacuation. That's going to be a tough case to sell to somebody when the grid is down. Next slide, Keith. There is an NFPA rule testing reference on circuit breakers. This is usually what I kind of counter with when somebody talks about have you really done a full load test. Those main incoming circuit breakers that are feeding your panels also need to be tripped regularly. And I've had hands-on experience with equipment, that tiebreaker system, where it had not been exercised since the day it was put in, and 8 years later, all the relays in it locked up and failed. So I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position. Luckily, we were doing that during a test, and so we were able to control it, but it would have been a disaster if it happened during an actual outage. Next slide, Keith. Again, there's a lot of different reasons for resiliency at a hospital. These kind of go to the heart of them. We've seen a lot of this across the country, from aging or insufficient infrastructure. A lot of generation is being retired. The older plants are being phased out and replaced with renewables. There is a lot of distributed infrastructure going in. That just makes the grid a lot more vulnerable to outages. In some ways it helps, but in some ways it makes it more vulnerable. Cybersecurity concerns, harsher weather cycles. I'm not going to bring up Texas again, I promise. And there's always ongoing regulatory changes. But really, community hospitals and even all hospitals really want to be the place that the community can rely on in the event of a true emergency. And so that, I think that goes to the heart of why you want to be prepared. Next slide, please, Keith. Grid interruptions are happening more frequently. I think we can skip this slide because I think we've already. Go ahead, next slide.
Come on, use Texas in a sentence one more time.
No, I'm trying. I'm biting my tongue. I don't want to try to figure out what the next state is going to be that's going to get hit. It's scary. It really is very scary. I wouldn't want to be in those shoes of those managers today. I really would not as especially with COVID last year, but even more those facility managers in Texas. I feel bad for what they're going through. Even if they have a perfect plan, they're under a lot of stress. So resiliency master planning really comes from really kind of bullet points. You need to create an energy master plan that aligns with your system's facility master plan. Is your technology already outmoded? What's it going to look like in the grid of tomorrow? What's it going to look like if you put on solar panels? What's it going to look like if you bring in some CHP or some battery storage? There's a financial value of that equipment, and you need to understand for yourself what that value is, but also you need to be able to make that financial case to the finance people as to why you need to make this investment. And that goes to the last bullet. What's the cost of lost surgeries, lost patient care, or having to shut down some of your services? And I think, is that the last slide on my deck? Oh, no. Some of the best practice solutions that we've seen. Of course, most hospitals are supposed to have two sources of independent power. Do you really know where those two sources are coming from? Are they coming down the same street on the same telephone pole line? I've seen that at a number of hospitals. What's your connected load? What's your capacity? Are the generators parallel? Typically see a hospital with a lot of generators, but they're all individual. So if one goes down, it's going to lose it. Again, the perfect world is all this is taken into account, or at least you've risk rated how this affects your ability to perform an emergency. Trying to see if there's any bullet points here. About some of those. Again, just like a data center, you should be considering N+1 really, not only your electric power supply feed from the utility, but also on your generators. And then we go to the next slide, Keith. I know we're going through this pretty quickly. So this was a mid-sized New England hospital. It had 2 700. This was actually, I don't know, Keith, you or Jeremy, you want to go through? This is actually your example.
Yeah.
Although I worked with your team on this, so it's near and dear to my heart.
Well, then you can correct me if I'm wrong. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, actually, interesting. I'd point out one item. I don't have a slide for it, but as Steve mentioned, when you're, when best laid plans. I'm vice president and general manager for New England, so this couple of these slides are New England based. But we did have a customer, interestingly enough, who had gone in New England. We have to put a customer through an audit twice a year, once in the summer, once in the winter. So each program period. And in that it's a 30-minute notice. It's a 5-day window, so they know it's coming in a week, but they don't know when. But there is a 30-minute notice. And we had a facility up in New Hampshire who's typically about 1.5 megawatts of load. The event got called, and we have real time. The image that you see on the screen, we have real time data, so we can physically watch the event occur, and we can watch the customer's participation. So the customer in New Hampshire, we're watching the participation, and there is none. And we were surprised because they're normally very, very astute at performing when called upon. And so the salesperson reached out to the plant manager and said, "Is everything okay? We noticed you're not performing." And there was an aha moment. His crew happened to be all on the roof of the building that day working on some equipment. And nobody heard their phone or their pagers go off that the event had been called and they needed to go trigger. He ran downstairs and he threw the switch, but he basically didn't lock it in. So the generators kicked on, and within 5 minutes they kicked right back off. He was back in his office thinking everything was fine, and lo and behold, we reached out to him a second time and said, "It looks like you went off, but you came back on again." So there are times where the best laid plans are not always going to happen. So again, things that the facilities learn through experience. In terms of what all of this means to a facility from a participation perspective and an earnings perspective, again, this is a mid-sized hospital actually located here in Connecticut. As Steve started to say, they're running 2 750 kW gens, which gives them about 850 kW of load. And they're actually participating in, and as Jeremy mentioned, stacking. So they're stacking both the capacity program from ISO New England, the ISO New England being the grid operator, They're participating in that 30-minute notice that I described a minute ago. And they're also participating in the utility, local utility program, which again is a day ahead notice, and it's referred to as Connected Solutions. So the grid is the program, if you think about it, that's really there to protect the grid in the situation that we did see in Texas, where there's a scarcity event, a supply shortage. The Connected Solutions utility program is really more about taking the peak out of the load across the utility system on any given day, typically in the summertime. But again, we have in New England, even as recently as mid-January, had an event that on the utility side to try to take that winter peak out. And then again, obviously, I think as Jeremy mentioned, the ability to reduce cap tag as well. This hospital, again, being a smaller, mid-sized, is realizing about $100,000 a year in savings from that participation. Ooh, a little feedback. Larger Midwest hospital. Again, this is a 2 megawatt facility, and they're participating in the capacity performance program. Can't see it. Get rid of the. Let's see if I can get away from my speaker real quick. In their particular case, in the capacity performance program, they're realizing close to $300,000 a year, utilizing their generator, and an additional $450,000 a year in cap tag savings. So again, benefit there to, in their case, 100% generator usage. There's no load shedding through BMS controls. There's no solar, passive solar capacity or anything involved in that. That's just a straight up generator. Probably the biggest and best example of again, very large hospital in New England. As you can see, they have a number of different steam turbines, a couple of diesel generators that have been permitted for non-emergency use. And this is a group that if you go back a number of years ago, found themselves in a somewhat of a situation where they needed to really control what they were doing, both from a cost perspective, but also from a reliability or a resiliency perspective. So they really took matters into their own hands by building out the program that you see in front of you. They too are participating in the ISO ADCR capacity program for 5 megawatts in the summer, a little less obviously in the winter for a number of reasons. But more importantly, they're also participating in an economic program. So this is a group, and you can see from the picture to the bottom right, they are actually participating, and they're getting called when prices go over, I believe it's $1,000. So anytime we go over $1,000 a kilowatt, they are getting called, and again, it's a good opportunity for them to know that they can run their plant and make money at the same time. Included in that too, they're participating actually in 2 different Connected Solutions utility programs, similar to the Connecticut hospital. They're too participating in the targeted dispatch, and those targeted dispatches tend to get called, at least in New England, will only get called, maybe a dozen times over the summer. In the daily dispatch, over the course of the summer months, they could be called. I think last summer they were called 50 times. So they get called a whole lot more often, but it also pays substantially more than the Connected Solutions program. So between the 2 utility programs, the cap tag and the 2 ISO programs, they're netting close to $2.5 million a year in total financial benefit. So again, huge opportunity for them to play in that arena in a couple of different ways. So just so you can see, one of the questions that we oftentimes get when somebody starts this conversation is, "Oh, I can't curtail." And the reality is, you'll be surprised. There's always going to be, even if you can't utilize a generator, there's always a way to participate. And again, this hospital took full advantage of their participation. But even again, $100,000 a year for a small hospital is certainly nothing to sneeze at. So With that, we'll open it up to any questions. Let's see. All right. So one of the questions I sort of described it, Jeremy. I'll let you take maybe a look at it from a non-New England perspective. One of the questions was, can you discuss some of the unique advantages that a customer can have when it comes to that program stacking?
So some of the unique advantages is basically when we take a look at program stacking, we're finding a way to identify all the different revenue streams that you may have. So, one thing I wanted to add, kind of along those lines, when Steve was talking about his slides and, how often do you test your generators? Obviously hospitals with generators and running those tests, one thing that I did want to bring up that we really didn't have it in the presentation, from a sustainability perspective is that, we can help you get those gens retrofitted so that they are compliant, so that they're, tier 2 and tier 4, with natural gas or diesel, whatever the case may be. So we can help you along those lines. Obviously, you should be testing those gens quite frequently. And if, they're dirty gens, so to speak, we can get that to a place where, they are more sustainable, firing those up and taking a look at those. So that's one thing outside of it. But as far as, unique to the program stacking, with the different, grids that are in play for the demand response, there's different value adds across each one of those grids. So, when we take a look at it and, we identify what grid you're in and what programs you may be eligible for, then we work to your strengths with your engineers and your facility managers there. Some people might not be able to curtail on a short notice. They need that additional lead time in order to do so. So, the key to, our programs is we share in your success. It's a revenue sharing program. So, our goals are in line in that you perform well on these tests, because if you don't get paid, then CPOWER and Hospital Energy for these programs doesn't get paid as well. So we want to make sure that we find you programs that you're uniquely able to both curtail, to utilize all of your assets there, and then identify those programs within that zone that meet your needs that you can stack upon one another. So whether it be active curtailment, like we mentioned with demand response, or the utility programs, all the way down to the passive curtailment with energy efficiency. Obviously, even in the keynote, it was talk about some of the different facilities and the different energy efficiency initiatives. VFDs and lighting and all of those things that have a permanent year-round KW reduction. We can stack that on to an active demand response program just to accentuate and increase the revenue stream for you, based on where you're located within the CPOWER footprint.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Steve, I'll let you field this one. Question is, what advice might you give someone as they're thinking about 2021 and their energy strategy, given the environment that we remain in?
Wow, that's a pretty deep subject to talk about, especially considering the events of the last couple of weeks. We're looking at both sides of the client, from both the procurement side and also the demand side, as which corresponds well with your program. On the just a very high level, certainly on the procurement side, I think people have to have a very knowledgeable, well-versed advisor to guide them on their best procurement strategy in the deregulated states. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't understand what you're paying in the regulated states and exactly what makes up your bills. Because when we do our work on the demand side, and I think CPOWER does kind of a similar study, the devil is in the details of those bills. You really need to understand what's causing different charges to be ratcheted up and how you can control those. And one of the things that we found in a number of our assessments on the demand side is that actually supplemental generation can be used to take off some of the peaks that you'll see in that we see in the usage profiles, and cut back on those ratchets. And so I think those are kind of the key areas that I'd be looking at, when we do our study. And again, that kind of goes hand in hand. If those generators can be used then also at the same time for demand response incentives and to shave those peaks, then you're going to leverage that savings quite a bit. And I think we one of the ways, Keith, we see that in New England is with the cap tag values that show up in the bills.
Right.
Hope that answered the question. I think it did.
Thanks. One more question, which I'll take. So if there's any other questions, just you got a minute to put them into the chat box. One of the other questions that popped up was, how did we see the world from a demand perspective given COVID this year? And I'll tell you, it was relatively interesting. Where we might have normally expected loads to come way down, we were surprised. For certain instances where loads went down, we saw loads come up on the other side. A number of manufacturers who, in some way were participating in manufacture of PPE. We had one who unfortunately couldn't participate at all. They were flat out 24/7, and we appreciated them for their service, and weren't going to ask them to. And the utility even understood that there would be zero performance from them under the circumstances. So, a lot of manufacturers we did see performance from. Schools, interestingly enough, where you might have thought in a lot of instances you would have seen no consumption. What consumption they did have to basically maintain the building envelope, when it came time for an audit or an event, there was nobody in the building except for the team that was, basically managing the facility. So they were able to take the building practically to zero, where you wouldn't normally have gone that deep in a typical school day with no one in there. They were actually able to do that. We saw the same thing with some commercial real estate that, again, we're managing the building envelope at the time of an event. For an hour and a half, let the temperature drop. It really wasn't going to affect anybody. So we did actually see increased performance while we saw lower load. So again, I think overall, as we look back on our information that we've garnished from this last summer, our expectations in terms of megawatts remain the same, but again, just certainly coming from different places. So I guess at this point there are no other questions. So I guess with that, we will again appreciate everybody's time. And if there's any other questions, you have our contact info on the screen, and we can certainly reply back to anybody with any questions. So again, appreciate everybody's time, and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.